forming the budget or raising revenues when you need to, is you hear stories of money not being spent.
We are going to leave this discussion now, but you can find it streaming live online at C-SPAN's homepage. On to the floor of the U.S. Senate, which will be taking up the nomination of James Comey to be the director of the FBI, a vote to move forward on his confirmation scheduled for 5:30, and work today on funding for transportation and housing programs.
Of our government's legislative branch, establish the works of their hands, and strengthen them to honor you by serving others. Lord, let your life-giving spirit move them to feel greater compassion for those in need. Use them to remove barriers that divide us, to make suspicions disappear, and to cause hatred to cease. May they strive to be agents of healing and hope as they help us all live in greater justice and peace. We pray in your great name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
President,
Majority Leader.
following morning business will be a period of Following leader remarks will be a period of morning business until 4:15 today. Following that morning business, Senate will resume consideration of S. 1243, the transportation bill. At 4:30, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the nomination of James Comey, the director of the FBI. I'm sorry to report, Mr. President, there will be a cloture vote on him at 5:30 today. Our chief law enforcement officer, we had to file cloture on that. Mr. President, every respectable economist has said that the short-sighted, arbitrary cuts known as sequester will cost American jobs. Medical researchers say that these painful cuts will set medical research in this country back decades, potentially costing the world a cure for cancer, flu, AIDS, and many other diseases that we're on the cusp of making great headway. The sequester, we know, will cost us investments in education that give children a shot at success and keep American workers competitive. We also know this sequester will slash the safety net that keeps millions of senior citizens, children, veterans and low-income families from descending into poverty. And we know the sequester is as bad for national security as it is for the economy. These cuts have grounded a third of the United States combat aircraft, slashed troop training budgets, and kept aircraft carriers, in the plural, that should have been headed for the Persian Gulf and other places, stranded in port instead. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of civilian employees of the Department of Defense, employees who support military missions carried out by service members overseas, have been furloughed. But it's not too late to reverse these hard-hearted cuts, cuts that were never supposed to take effect in the first place. The sequester was designed to be so painful, it would force Democrats and Republicans to compromise and find a smart, responsible way to reduce the deficit. There was compromise on one side with the Democrats, and of course, none, as usual, with Republicans on the other side. But we haven't given up on reversing these cuts and choosing that responsible path. We've cut the deficit in half over the last 3 years by more than $2.6 trillion. And while there's more work to be done, we should be making targeted cuts while investing in things that make America grow. So it's clear. We have reduced the debt by $2.6 trillion, and the yearly deficit has been cut in half over the last 3 years. The way to pursue this type of sound fiscal policy is through regular order of the budget process. And while there's more work to be done, the cuts that I've talked about, Mr. President, we should be making targeted cuts while investing in things that make America grow. The American economy is poised to grow. It's growing now. Not strong enough, not fast enough, but it is growing. All we have to do is get out of the way. According to a report released last week by the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, reversing the sequester would create additional 900,000 jobs. And it would increase gross domestic product by a percentage point. That's a million jobs right there. The United States just dug its way out of the Great Recession. We've seen 40 straight months of job growth, with private sector employers adding more than 7.2 million jobs. But we cannot afford to reject almost 1 million new jobs. Congress must reverse the sequester and stop the manufacturing crisis. Now, Mr. President, if Republicans force us to the brink of another government shutdown for ideological reasons, the economy will suffer. I would suggest to any of my Republican colleagues that has this idea, give a call to Newt Gingrich. He'll return your phone calls and ask him how it worked. It was disastrous for Newt Gingrich, the Republicans, and the country. It didn't work then, and it won't work now. If Republicans threaten a catastrophic default in the nation's bills, the economy will suffer, and that's an understatement. If Republicans refuse to work with Democrats to negotiate a reasonable budget that reverses these deep cuts, the economy will suffer. It's time to remove the stumbling blocks that are preventing the American economy from recovering and expanding. It's been 129 days since the Senate passed its reasonable pro-growth budget. Remember, Mr. President, the Republicans said, we want regular order. We want a budget. We passed the budget. Now they won't follow regular order. They won't let us even go to conference. We've asked consent to go to conference with the House 17 different times. But as long as Senate Republicans refuse to allow Budget Committee Chairwoman Patty Murray to negotiate a budget compromise with her House Republican counterparts, the economy is at risk. It's time to set aside partisan differences and work to find common ground. Passing the bipartisan transportation appropriation bill that's on the floor now would be a good step toward restoring regular order. This measure, the transportation bill, will create jobs, rebuilding America's deficient infrastructure, and renew the nation's commitment to make affordable housing available to low-income families. I commend the Appropriations Committee, led by Barbara Mikulski. This subcommittee that's now before the Senate is led by Patty Murray. They've done wonderful work. I believe some of my Republican colleagues are as eager to return to regular order of passing appropriations bills as I am. I really do believe that. They've got to break away from the pack. I hope these reasonable Republicans will continue to work with us to advance this important bipartisan measure. Would the chair announce the business of the day?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 4:15 p.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
I would note the absent quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Consent that further proceedings under the quorum call be suspended and that I be recognized.
Without objection, Senator from Arizona.
Sunday brought the sad news that my dear friend Colonel George E. Bud Day passed away. He was 88 years old. To say he lived a full life would be quite an understatement. His was filled with so many extraordinary experiences, adventures, challenges, accomplishments, and with such love, compassion, and courage that it could have supplied enough experiences, excitement, and satisfaction for 10 lifetimes. Bud knew defeats and triumphs on a scale few will ever know. He lived in moments filled with every conceivable emotion. He knew terror and suffering. He knew joy and deliverance. He knew solidarity, self-respect, and dignity. Knowing him as well as I did, I'm certain he faced his end, satisfied he had made the most of his time on earth. He will have faced it with courage as he faced all adversity. He will have faced it with gratitude for the love and companionship of his beloved wife and best friend, Dory, his sons, Stevie and George, and his twin girls, Sandra and Sonia. He will have faced it with humility for having had the honor to serve his country with distinction in 3 wars: World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. I had the honor of being Bud's friend for almost 5 decades of his 88 years. We met in 1967 when the Vietnamese left me to die in the prison cell Bud shared with Major Norris Overley. But Bud and Norris wouldn't let me die. They bathed me, fed me, nursed me, encouraged me, and ordered me back to life. Norris did much of the work, but Bud did all he could, considering that he too had recently been near death. Shot, bombed, beaten savagely by his captors, and his arm broken in 3 places. He was a hard man to kill, and he expected the same from his subordinates. They saved my life, a big debt to repay, obviously. But more than that, Bud showed me how to save my self-respect and my honor, and that is a debt I can never repay. Bud was a fierce, and I mean really fierce, resistor. He could not be broken in spirit, no matter how broken he was in body. Those who knew Bud after the war could see how tough he was. But my God, to have known him in prison, confronting our enemies day in and day out, never, ever yielding, defying men who had the power of life and death over us, to witness him sing the national anthem in response to having a rifle pointed at his face, well, that was something to behold. Unforgettable. No one had more guts than Bud or greater determination to do his duty and then some, to keep faith with his country and his comrades, whatever the cost. Bud was my commanding officer, but more, he was my inspiration, as he was for all the men who were privileged to serve under him. Nothing offers more compelling testimony to Bud's guts and determination and his patriotism than the account of his escape from captivity. In the entire war, he was the only American who managed to escape from North Vietnam. In 1967, then Major Bud Day commanded a squadron of F-100s that served as forward air controllers over North Vietnam and Laos. They were called the Misties, named for Bud's favorite song. Theirs was probably the most dangerous combat duty in the Air Force, and they suffered high casualties. On August 26, Bud Day was one of those casualties. Bud was shot down by a surface-to-air missile 20 miles inside North Vietnam. He hit the fuselage of his F-100 when he ejected, breaking his arm, damaging his eye, and injuring his back. Bud was immediately captured by North Vietnamese militia. He was interrogated by his captors in an underground prison camp. When he refused to answer their questions, they staged a mock execution. Then they hung him by his feet for hours and beat him. Believing he was too badly injured to escape, they tied him up loosely and left him guarded by 2 green teenage soldiers. They misjudged him. On his 5th day of captivity, he untied his ropes and escaped. Bud stayed on the run for about 2 weeks. He wasn't certain how long he was free. He lost track of time. He made it across the DMZ and into South Vietnam. A bomb, however, had fallen near him his 2nd night on the run, striking him with shrapnel, concussing him and rupturing his eardrums. But limping, bleeding, starving, and in great pain, Bud kept heading south, across rivers, through dense jungles, over hills, crawling sometimes on his hands and knees, evading enemy patrols, and surviving on berries, frogs, and rainwater. On the last night of Bud's escape, he arrived within 2 kilometers of a forward Marine base. Sensibly judging it more dangerous to approach the guarded base at night than to wait until morning when the Marine guards could see he was an American, Bud slept one more night in the jungle. Early the next morning, he encountered a Viet Cong patrol. He was shot trying to hobble to the base, recaptured, and returned to the camp he had escaped, where he was tortured some more. A few days later, Bud's captors took him to the prison we called the Plantation, where I would meet him 2 months later. He was one of the most grievously injured pilots to arrive in Hanoi. Norris helped nurse him back to some semblance of health, although he would never fully recover from his wounds. Then Bud helped Norris nurse me. Whenever I felt my spirits and resistance flag, I looked to Bud for the courage to continue and for the example of how to serve my country in difficult circumstances. Bud was the bravest man I ever knew, and I've known more than a few. He was great company, too, and made it possible to actually have fun in prison once in a while. He received the Medal of Honor when he came home, the highest of his many decorations for valor. Despite his injuries, he managed to regain flying status and commanded a flight wing at Eglin Air Force Base. When Bud ultimately retired from the Air Force, he practiced law. After his service in World War II, but before he deployed to the Korean War, he had graduated from college and law school. He devoted his practice to defending the interests of his fellow veterans. Bud and I stayed close through all the years that have passed since our war. We talked often. We saw each other regularly. He campaigned with me in all my campaigns and advised me always. We argued sometimes, agreed more often, laughed a lot, and always enjoyed each other's company. I'm going to miss him terribly. Even though Bud had reached advanced years, for some reason I could never imagine Bud yielding to anything, even, I thought, to the laws of nature. Tough old bird that he was, I always thought he would outlive us all. But he's gone now, to a heaven I expect he imagined would look like an Iowa cornfield in early winter, filled with pheasants. I will miss Bud every day for the rest of my life, but I will see him again. I know I will. I'll hunt the field with him, and I look forward to it. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. And today in the Senate, considering legislation on transportation and housing spending for 2014. Last week, Senate Democrats spoke to reporters about the bill, which is $54 billion.
Schumer will be here in a minute. He's just doing a mini press conference on the way in. There we go. Senator Durbin may show up. Yesterday, President Obama gave a very clear message to the American people, one of optimism. But it also says it's time to put politics aside and create jobs for the middle class. Our economy is recovering, not well enough, but it's recovering. And it's ready to take off if we would have some of the restraints that the Republicans have placed on us. We could have an economy that would be comparable to the Clinton years. Our job in Washington is to give our economy room to grow by making smart choices and avoiding more self-inflicted wounds. The deficit has been cut in half the last 3 years. There's still more work to be done, but we should be making smart choices instead of pursuing meat axe approaches. That is, European-style austerity. But even the European community decided in the last few days that austerity is not the answer to their problems, that they have to start creating jobs. And that's what we have to also come to that conclusion. Right now, we're not making smart choices, and that is an understatement. Instead of closing these wide tax loopholes that all during the presidential campaign, Governor Romney and all the people that were trying to help him said they agreed with, closing some loopholes, tax loopholes. Instead of our doing that, we're gutting medical research to NIH. Not we, but they are forcing us to do that. Remember, NIH last year, $1.6 billion in cuts. This coming year with sequestration, the Republicans are pushing, would cut it another $2 billion. As Francis Collins, the brilliant director of NIH, said last week, because of sequester, 700 families will be denied the life-saving services of one of the institutes of NIH, where they take these young men and women who have these very difficult diseases that they don't understand yet, but they need to understand. And that's what this institute's about, to find curative processes for these people who have these diseases. We're within 5 years of the flu vaccine. Flu, why are we so focused on that? Because, as Dr. Collins said, each year, 35,000 people die from flu each year. And we're close to having, I was there 3 weeks ago now, and the person that's in charge of that institute talked about how close we were to having a shot that will take care of flu with one vaccination. You'll have to come back every year. It'll cover whatever the flu is that given year. But the first step toward making smarter choices is to make sure that the Senate legislates as it used to legislate on a bipartisan basis. I talked on the floor today about some choices that appear so evident. During the Great Depression, Roosevelt tried something very unique, Social Security, a way to take care of seniors in the golden years. That passed on a bipartisan basis. President Eisenhower, because of his experience in the military, bringing in a bunch of troops and equipment across the United States, decided back when he was a major that something had to be done. When he became president, on a bipartisan basis, we created about 50,000 new miles of highways on a bipartisan basis. Under today's numbers, that would be legislation worth $500 billion. Then it was $50 billion. Medicare, same thing. Democrats and Republicans joined together to do something that even President Truman talked about many years before. So we need to start doing good things as we've done in the past. I was encouraged to see 19 of our Republican colleagues join with Senator Murray on that very important bill dealing with transportation appropriations to advance the bill. 19 Republicans broke away and decided to do that. Republican leadership in both houses may be controlled by the Tea Party, but it's encouraging to see more independent-minded Republicans breaking away from the pack. There's not a lot at this stage, but I think it's going to grow. Republican colleagues are sick of gridlock, at least a few of them are, as we are. I know they want the Senate to once again be a place where we work across the aisle and forge bipartisan compromise to the challenges we face as a nation. We've taken some important steps in that direction in recent weeks. Passing a bipartisan transportation bill would be another significant step forward. I hope my Republican colleagues will join in making that possible. Senator Schumer? Oh, I didn't know you were here. You weren't here. Sorry about that. Snuck in.
Okay, well, thank you, Senator Reid. And first I want to say that Chairwoman Mikulski has done a fantastic job in crafting our appropriations process, and Senator Murray has done a great job in crafting a bipartisan transportation and housing bill that would be a boost to our economy and a boon to middle-class families. So I want to commend both of them for their very hard and good work. We're offering Republicans a chance to pass a bipartisan bill that would create good-paying, middle-class jobs. Now, they should take us up on it. Unfortunately, a group of hard-right Republicans in the House has decided to take a different...
Mr. President, I want to eulogize a great American that Senator McCain has just spoken about. It's been said that it is the soldier who has given us our most important freedoms over the course of our history. And that was certainly the case of Air Force Colonel George Bud Day. That is a true statement. Colonel Day was a good friend of Senator McCain's. He was a resident of Florida, living in the Fort Walton Beach area. And he sadly passed away, but at the very extended life's age of 88. And I want to, in addition to Senator McCain's comments, to take a moment to honor and remember this American hero who was one of the most highly decorated service members that this country has ever seen. He was a Medal of Honor recipient. He was a veteran of 3 wars: World War II, the Korean War, and the war in Vietnam. And because his F-100 fighter jet was shot down, he ended up being a prisoner of war in Vietnam for nearly 60 years. And there in Hanoi, he and Senator McCain became cellmates. When asked about their experience together, Senator McCain said, "I owe my life to Bud and much of what I know about character and patriotism. He was the bravest man I ever knew." End of quote. Senator McCain has just recounted a number of those things, and I don't know, but I have heard it said either from Colonel Day or Senator McCain, but it was John McCain who was put into that cell nearly dead after he had been beaten, after his arm was broken when he ejected from his aircraft. He had been beaten, and they put him in this cell, and Bud Day nursed him back to health. After the POWs were released from Vietnam, interestingly, Colonel Day returned to active duty, and he returned to active flying status. He retired in 1977 as the Air Force's most decorated officer. And it's also been said that a nation can be judged by how it treats those who have borne its battles. After he left the Air Force, Colonel Day, listen to this, he continued public service. He went to law school, he practiced law, and he championed veterans' issues. So, Mr. President, I just wanted to take a moment after an emotional speech by Senator McCain to say that I say, and many are saying, a little prayer of thanks that Colonel Bud Day helped preserve the freedom of this country with his service to this country. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. And in a quorum call here on the floor of the Senate, live coverage here on C-SPAN 2, today they're going to be working on transportation and housing spending. It's a $54 billion bill, $2.3 billion more this year for this coming year, 2014, than the past year, and nearly $10 billion more than the House bill. At 5:30, they expect to set all of that aside and work on the confirmation of FBI Director nominee James Comey. And then also pending in the Senate, some executive nominations to the National Labor Relations Board. While they're in a quorum call here on the floor, we'll take a look at an event that happened earlier today for the State Department. Secretary of State John Kerry made a statement about the Israeli-Palestinian talks scheduled to start tonight, and that he was going to appoint Martin Indyk, the former U.S. ambassador to Israel, to manage those talks. And we'll take a look at this while the Senate's in a quorum call.
Hi, Matt. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Well, as you all know, it's taken many hours and many trips to make possible the resumption of Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. And the negotiators are now en route to Washington, even as we speak here. And I will have more to say about the journey to this moment and what our hopes are after our initial meetings conclude tomorrow. This effort began with President Obama's historic trip to Israel and Ramallah in March of this year. And without his commitment, without his conversations there, and without his engagement in this initiative, we would not be here today. The President charged me directly with the responsibility to explore fully the possibility of resuming talks, and in our meetings with President Abbas and Prime Minister Netanyahu, he conveyed his expectations for this process. Getting to this resumption has also taken the courageous leadership of Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Abbas, and I salute both of them for their willingness to make difficult decisions and to advocate within their own countries and with their own leadership teams, countries with the Palestinian territories. I would also like to recognize the important contributions of senior negotiators on both sides, particularly Minister Tzipi Livni and Saeb Erekat, both of whom really stood up and stood strong in the face of very tough criticism at home, and whose unwavering commitment made the launch of these talks possible. I look forward to beginning work with them tonight. Going forward, it's no secret that this is a difficult process. If it were easy, it would have happened a long time ago. It's no secret, therefore, that many difficult choices lie ahead for the negotiators and for the leaders as we seek reasonable compromises on tough, complicated, emotional, and symbolic issues. I think reasonable compromises has to be a keystone of all of this effort. I know the negotiations are going to be tough, but I also know that the consequences of not trying could be worse. To help the parties navigate the path to peace and to avoid its many pitfalls, we'll be very fortunate to have on our team, on a day-to-day basis, working with the parties, wherever they are negotiating, a seasoned American diplomat, Ambassador Martin Indyk, who has agreed to take on this critical task at this crucial time as the U.S. Special Envoy for Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. Assisting Martin will be, as his deputy and as a senior advisor to me, will be Frank Lowenstein, who has been working with me on this process from the beginning. In his memoir about the peace process, Ambassador Indyk quotes a poem by Samuel Coleridge that begins, "If men could learn from history what lessons it would teach us." Ambassador Indyk brings to this challenge his deep appreciation for the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And from his service under President Clinton, Secretary Christopher, and Secretary Albright, he brings a deep appreciation for the art of U.S. diplomacy in the Middle East. That experience has earned Ambassador Indyk the respect of both sides, and they know that he has made the cause of peace his life mission. He knows what has worked, and he knows what hasn't worked, and he knows how important it is to get this right. Ambassador Indyk is realistic. He understands that Israeli-Palestinian peace will not come easily, and it will not happen overnight. But he also understands that there is now a path forward, and we must follow that path with urgency. He understands that to ensure that lives are not needlessly lost, we have to ensure that opportunities are not needlessly lost. And he shares my belief that if the leaders on both sides continue to show strong leadership and a willingness to make those tough choices and a willingness to reasonably compromise, then peace is possible. So, Martin, I'm grateful that you've agreed to take a leave from your post at the Brookings Institution to serve once again in this most important role, and I know that you are eager to get to work, as am I. Martin. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for that generous introduction and for vesting in me such important responsibilities. I am deeply honored to serve you and to serve President Obama in your noble endeavor to achieve Israeli-Palestinian peace. The fact that later today Israeli and Palestinian negotiators will sit down in this building to resume final status negotiations after a 3-year hiatus is testament to your extraordinary, tireless efforts, backed by President Obama, to try to resolve this intractable conflict. President Obama made the case so eloquently in his historic speech in Jerusalem in March of this year, when he argued to an audience of young Israelis that, quote, peace is necessary, peace is just, and peace is possible. And you, Mr. Secretary, have proven him right. You've shown that it can be done. I couldn't agree more with President Obama. It's been my conviction for 40 years that peace is possible, since I experienced the agony of the 1973 Yom Kippur War as a student in Jerusalem. In those dark days, I witnessed firsthand how one of your predecessors, Henry Kissinger, brokered a ceasefire that ended the war and paved the way for peace between Israel and Egypt. Because of your confidence that it could be done, You took up the challenge when most people thought you were on a mission impossible. And backed by the President, you drove the effort with persistence, patience, and creativity. As a result, today, Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Mahmoud Abbas have made the tough decisions required to come back to the negotiating table. I'm therefore deeply grateful to you and to President Obama for entrusting me with the mission of helping you take this breakthrough and turn it into a full-fledged Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement. It is a daunting and humbling challenge, but one that I cannot desist from. I look forward with great excitement to working with you, President Abbas and Prime Minister Netanyahu and their teams to do our best to achieve President Obama's vision of two states living side by side in peace and security. I also look forward to working with the team that you are assembling, starting with Frank Lowenstein, who, as you said, has made such an important contribution to getting us to this point and who will be my partner in this endeavor. 15 years ago, my son, Jacob, who was 13 at the time, designed a screensaver for my computer. It consisted of a simple question that flashed across the screen constantly. Dad, is there peace in the Middle East yet? I guess you could say, Mr. Secretary, that he was one of the original skeptics. But behind that skepticism was also a yearning. And for 15 years, I've only been able to answer him, not yet. Perhaps, Mr. Secretary, through your efforts and our support, we may yet be able to tell Jake, and more importantly, all those young Israelis and Palestinians who yearn for a different, better tomorrow, that this time we actually made it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Great statement. Terrific. Thank you very much. All right, grab your books and move on. Thank you all. We'll see you later. Thank you.
Well, that's different this time around. What is different this time around?
We'll be talking to you as we go forward.
And on the floor of the Senate, still in a quorum call, they'll be working on transportation and housing spending today. And last week, Democrats in the Senate talked about the transportation spending bill. While we're in this quorum call, we'll take a look at some of their comments.
Schumer will be here in a minute. He's just doing a mini press conference on the way in. There we go. Senator Durbin may show up. Yesterday, President Obama gave a very clear message to the American people, one of optimism. But it also says it's time to put politics aside and create jobs for the middle class. Our economy is recovering, not well enough, but it's recovering. And it's ready to take off if we would have some of the restraints that the Republicans have placed on us. We could have an economy that would be comparable to the Clinton years. Our job in Washington is to give our economy room to grow by making smart choices and avoiding more self-inflicted wounds. The deficit has been cut in half the last 3 years. There's still more work to be done, but we should be making smart choices instead of pursuing meat axe approaches. That is, European-style austerity. But even the European community decided in the last few days that austerity is not the answer to their problems, that they have to start creating jobs. And that's what we have to also come to that conclusion. Right now, we're not making smart choices, and that is an understatement. Instead of closing these wide tax loopholes that all during the presidential campaign, Governor Romney and all the people that were trying to help him said they agreed with, closing some loopholes, tax loopholes. Instead of our doing that, we're gutting medical research NIH. Not we, but they are forcing us to do that. Remember, NIH last year, $1.6 billion in cuts. This coming year with sequestration, the Republicans are pushing, would cut it another $2 billion. As Francis Collins, the brilliant director of NIH, said last week, because of sequester, 700 families will be denied the life-saving services of one of the institutes of NIH, where they take these young men and women who have these very difficult diseases that they don't understand yet, but they need to understand. And that's what this institute's about, to find curative processes for these people who have these diseases. We're within 5 years of the flu vaccine. Flu, why are we so focused on that? Because, as Dr. Collins said, each year, 35,000 people die from flu each year. And we're close to having, I was there 3 weeks ago now, and the person that's in charge of that institute talked about how close we were to having a shot that will take care of flu with one vaccination. You have to come back every year. It'll cover whatever the flu is that given year. But the first step toward making smarter choices is to make sure that the Senate legislates as it used to legislate on a bipartisan basis. I talked on the floor today about some choices that appear so evident. During the Great Depression, Roosevelt tried something very unique, Social Security, a way to take care of seniors in the golden years. That passed on a bipartisan basis. President Eisenhower, because of his experience in the military, bringing a bunch of troops and equipment across the United States, decided back when he was a major that something had to be done. When he became president, on a bipartisan basis, we created about 50,000 new miles of highways on a bipartisan basis. Under today's numbers, that would be legislation worth $500 billion. Then it was $50 billion. Medicare, same thing. Democrats and Republicans joined together to do something that even President Truman talked about many years before. So we need to start doing good things as we've done in the past. I was encouraged to see 19 of our Republican colleagues join with Senator Murray on that very important bill dealing with transportation appropriations to advance the bill. 19 Republicans broke away and decided to do that. Republican leadership in both houses may be controlled by the Tea Party, but it's encouraging to see more independent-minded Republicans breaking away from the pack. There's not a lot at this stage, but I think it's going to grow. Republican colleagues are sick of gridlock, at least a few of them are, as we are. I know they want the Senate to once again be a place where we work across the aisle and forge bipartisan compromise to the challenges we face as a nation. We've taken some important steps in that direction in recent weeks. Passing a bipartisan transportation bill would be another significant step forward. I hope my Republican colleagues will join in making that possible. Senator Schumer? Oh, I didn't know you were here. You weren't here. Sorry about that. Snuck in.
Okay, well, thank you, Senator Reid. And first I want to say that Chairwoman Mikulski has done a fantastic job in crafting our appropriations process, and Senator Murray has done a great job in crafting a bipartisan transportation and housing bill that would be a boost to our economy and a boon to middle-class families. So I want to commend both of them for their very hard and good work. We're offering Republicans a chance to pass a bipartisan bill that would create good-paying, middle-class jobs. Now, they should take us up on it. Unfortunately, a group of hard-right Republicans in the House has decided to take a different and extreme approach, cutting funding for transportation and community development even lower than the sequester levels. The sequester was an economic punch to the gut for transportation, housing, and development programs, and doubling down now would be a knockout punch for our economy. By cutting another 9.4% on top of the sequester, the extreme House bill would grind to a halt important programs that create middle-class jobs and update our infrastructure for the 21st century. And it's hard to fathom what's happening here in America, that such a small group of people could have such large power. When it comes to the hard right group in the House, it's like the flea wagging the tail, wagging the dog. The dog's the overall country. A majority of Americans voted for a democratically controlled House. But because of redistricting, drawing districts in very convoluted ways, the tail is a House controlled by Republicans. But the flea is the 50 or so hard-right Republicans who seem to have a veto power over everything the House does and, as a result, everything our government does. And they are determined to shut down the government if they don't get their way. We've seen this hard-right group at work before. They believe so strongly that just about every government program is wrong and should be starved of funding, wither away, and die, that they're wrecking our economy and hurting the middle class dramatically. What they believe is not what the American people believe. For decades, Democrats, Republicans, and independents have strongly believed that government should fund transportation infrastructure. These bills were always bipartisan. Bud Shuster was one of the leaders in the House in creating such bipartisan bills. Both parties have agreed that it's up to the federal government to update airports, rebuild roads and bridges, modernize our transportation infrastructure. That's been what's been going on for decades. This was never a partisan issue. And yet, this flea on the tail of the dog seems to be controlling what goes on in the whole country. And it's such a minority of the American people's viewpoint. Now, thank God, the Senate stands in contrast, in sharp contrast to the House. You've seen that over the last several months when we've had bipartisan bills on so many different efforts. You saw yesterday, 2 days ago, you saw last week, 6 Republicans vote for the transportation bill in committee. And you just saw 2 days ago, 19 of them vote to bring the bill on the floor. But those on the far right in the House are calling for more obstruction, not only on the HUD bill, but on the entire budget. And we beseech our Senate Republican friends, they cannot be allowed to carry the day. That hard-right group cannot be allowed to carry the day. Please resist them. Here in the Senate, we have a chance to make smart investments that will grow the economy rather than cause another self-inflicted wound on our country and on the middle class. So we hope that our Republican friends will ignore the strident voices on the extreme right and do what's right in a bipartisan way for the country.
Patty, I think we'll punish Dick. You go ahead first for being late.
He wasn't that late. The transportation and housing bill that we are now debating on the floor really is a perfect example of how well Congress can work if we work together. Senator Collins and I have worked very closely together to write this bill. 6 Republicans voted for it in committee, and 73 members of the Senate voted to begin debate. We are now having a great debate with amendments. They're being offered by both Democrats and Republicans, and we have been very clear. We are open to amendments that improve the bill, whichever side of the aisle they come from. So I'm hoping that this bipartisanship continues and Republican leaders now don't crack their whip and push Republicans to filibuster a bill that many of them do support. Our bill is bipartisan because it is all about creating jobs. It's about investing in our families and our communities and laying down a strong foundation for long-term and broad-based economic growth, something we all believe we have to work on. This is what the American people want us to focus on. That is exactly what this bill is doing. I had a bridge collapse in my home state of Washington a few months ago, and that really, I think, put a spotlight on the infrastructure problems we face across this country, and our bill, the THUD bill, makes the investments that we need to have to address these critical issues. The bipartisan Senate bill stands in stark contrast to the partisan House bill, which would cut 15% below the current level. That will gut our investments in transportation and housing. It will hurt the economy, and it will cause even more of our workers to lose their jobs. The House bill really locks in sequestration on steroids. It's going to be bad for families, it's going to be terrible for jobs, and devastating for our infrastructure and long-term economic growth. But as we're proving now in the Senate, we do not have to live with these automatic cuts from sequestration, and we certainly don't have to make them worse. Investing in our communities, investing in our infrastructure does not have to be a partisan issue. There are, of course, serious differences between the House and Senate budgets, differences that I would like to sit down and work in a conference committee, bipartisan, to work our way out of. But until that, I am hopeful that we can continue working on a bipartisan basis to pass our appropriations bill. I think that as American people see the values and the priorities from our budgets written out and contrasted in these spending bills, and as the impacts of sequestration, like the furloughs of 650,000 defense workers now, keep piling up, the pressure is going to grow among Republicans to come to the table, end these constant crises, and work with us to find a bipartisan solution. Because bipartisanship work like this should be the norm, not the exception.
Any cleanup? Senator Durbin.
Thank you very much. And let me personally thank Senator Murray for your work on the Budget Committee, producing a budget resolution, and for your work on the bill that's on the floor. I just hope, as you say, that we can reach a point where we have a conference committee soon. President Obama went back to a place he's familiar with, Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, yesterday. He made a speech there as a senator and talked about the future of the economy. He returned yesterday to remind people that we still have a lot of work to do. He made the point, and it's a good point, we are in recovery. The economy that he inherited has dramatically improved. We've seen 7.2 million new jobs since he was elected president. Businesses had much more confidence in their building. And we've seen deficits falling, which is another important thing for our long-term economic outlook. But the president made it clear yesterday there's still a lot of work to do. And that's why we're here today, because we have to be part of the solution. And it starts with the bill that's on the floor. I'll make 3 quick points about it. First, let me tell you, this bill, as Senator Murray has said, includes the community development block grants. The cuts in the House of Representatives will bring this program's funding down to levels we haven't seen since 1975. These cuts alone, if they go through and are enacted into law, will eliminate over 40,000 jobs in the United States. That's the practical impact of this